Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anatomy of an Adaptation. This is a podcast that aims to compare and contrast classic novels with their cinematic adaptations. I'm your host, Nicolo Grasso, and I am joined finally by my good friend and fellow podcaster from Uncut Gems Podcast, Mr. Jakub Flasz. How are you doing, Jakub? It's so good to have you back on this pod in its new iteration.
Oh, awesome to be here, This is now the anatomy of an adaptation, so it feels new, but it also feels familiar. Weird. Familiar. Like Straker. He's a
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're coming back to the scene of the crime. You're like Ben Mears, being like...
Ben Mears being
Salem's Lot, it's calling back to me. I need to go back. You need to finish what you started. Because actually, I don't think we ever had an episode together talking about Stephen King. There was a conversation that I had with the good Yuan Galedo back in the old first days of the podcast where we talked about it. But I don't think we ever went back to the King well.
You know what we did? I'm not sure if you remember. Back for Clapper's Patreon, we did like a Spooktober Stephen King special, and I think you asked me then to talk about like your favorite, or bring your favorite King book and your favorite King film. And then I think I remember just coming over to plug Christine. But I think if you don't have access to it, I think I have this file somewhere on my PC. I can ping you the file.
You're right. I forgot about that. Actually, you're right.
It's like in the vault. Because I remember, because it's in the old Clapper's Patreon account, which I think is defunct now. And I asked Carson and Jack to let me get access to it, so I could download some of these old podcasts just for safekeeping.
Save them for posterity.
Yeah, so they're in the vault because like the sound quality on them, like, oh my god, and also just like how you hear yourself from like 5 years ago, and you're like, Jesus Christ. What were you thinking? But yeah,
Voices
it's there.
Opinions change, but one thing that doesn't change are the novels of Stephen King. They're there to stay. They're there to carry us over into more and more decades of many adaptations. So for people who clicked on the episode not knowing what we're talking about, today we're doing a very special episode, a very probably long episode, but we'll try to keep it contained, just like we would contain a vampire epidemic. Today we're talking about Stephen King's Salem's Lot, the 1979 Tobe Hooper adaptation, the 2004 TV movie, and the 2024 film.
Poor little boy. You can do nothing against the master. Stop, holy man! We'll cut the boy's throat. Back, holy man. Back, shaman. Back, priest! What would you give for this miserable boy?
What do you ask?
What would you give to reprieve him this night, to save him for another night?
What do you want?
The master wants you. Throw away your cross, face the master, your faith against his faith. Could you do that? Is your faith enough? Then do it.
And trust him to let the boy go? Run!
I think they're dead, Father.
Run!
I'm going to kill you.
Now you're part of the bargain.
I'm a priest.
A priest. Throw away the cross. Face the master. Faith against faith.
Jakub, you are the number one Stephen King fan that I know. What is your relationship with Salem's Lot? Where does it fit? Not so much in Stephen King's work, but where does it fit for you in his bibliography? Because I know you've read most of his books at this point.
I don't think most, because if you try to kind of keep track of what he writes, this customer, he writes constantly. So it's just like at some point when you just take a few years off and all of a sudden like, you have like 20 books to catch up to. So, however, like I don't want to go into like, well, long story short, Stephen King is my favorite writer, I think. Just, well, it's not the best writer I like because like I think at this point I think I can always say like Hemingway and Cormac McCarthy will be probably like a little bit higher up in terms of how what I think about their prose. But Stephen King is like my go-to comfort writer, and I think he's one of those guys who like I've always enjoyed, and he's also been my, let's just say, gateway drug to like adult fiction, because I wrote, and this no, not wrote read, sorry, and this is where Salem's comes into play, because I'm not sure if it's my favorite of his books. It may be my favorite of his books, because I think Christine's probably my favorite really, but it was the first one I read,
Oh wow, okay.
and I read it when I was 10.
Interesting age. You were like little Mark Petrie reading Stephen King books.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I kind of felt like I'm like this little boy, you know, like interested in these like morbid things, and I just like picked it up and said like I want like someone, I can't remember, like some older boy I knew like was talking, and he was like 16, was talking about this great book about vampires and whatever. So I had some like money scooted over somewhere, so I just like went and bought like a very very cheap paperback, and fell apart as I was reading it, and and it's kind of like one of those like for films, it's kind of like, it always has been like Jaws and Jurassic Park. When you watch something like this at a very young age, and you're like, holy moly, like this movies can be like this, you know. It's not like, you know, it's not like movie for kids, and it just feels like this is magical. So for me, this was like, books can be like that. Like now reading this as an adult, I've read this like, I don't know, a number of times now, but like you read this as an adult and you're like, there's stuff in this book that you don't, like I wouldn't want my child to read, because she'd be asking questions like, what does it mean? You know. But like this just like went right over my head when I was very young, so I didn't quite notice like the sexual violence that's in there, or the very uncomfortable subject matter that's just peppered all throughout, and just the violence itself.
It's nasty. It gets very dark.
But once you start understanding, then this is something that really gets to you. But I've cherished this book for a while, and I think I have like a strong relationship with it at this point, where so I love it on many levels.
Oh, very high praise. It's very different for me. I'm still a newbie, I would say. Well,
Oh no!
You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. Hold it in. I would still consider myself a newbie when it comes to Stephen King. But based on your journey, I would call it, that you've been doing for the past couple of years, I believe, correct? Like going like in chronological order through his books. I'm trying to do the same. I started, I want to say, around the end of like November, October, or December last year. Started again from Carrie, and I'm just going through all of his books right now. I just finished reading Rage. I'm halfway through Night Shift, the collection of short stories. And Salem's Lot, it was my first time reading it. I was familiar with the story because I'd already seen one of the adaptations that we're going to talk about. And I have to say, I think it is a flawed book, undeniably so, but it's one that has grown on me over the past month or so since I've finished reading it. It is the first time that King tackles this large ensemble cast of characters, and I think that's the true beauty of it. It's not so much a book about like things happening, but it's a book about a place, which is one of those generic stupid comments that are made sometimes, but it is very much true in this.
It's almost in the title, no?
It's almost in the title. What's this book about? Oh my god, it's about Salem's Sloth. But the actual way that the book itself is structured, you have specific chapters that are following this character and this other character, but then there's, I want to say, 3 or 4 very large chapters that are titled The Lot. They are from the perspective of the town itself, the people that inhabit it. And for being only his second book, came out in 1975-ish, 7, something like that.
75.
75, right. It's impressive. My favorite Stephen King book right now is The Stand. That just hit in a way I was not expecting when I read it. Over the span of 1 year, I was savoring it every step of the way. But I can already see, like this beginning of something of that scale, starting with Salem Slot. I really much like it, but I want to say so much. I wonder if part of the novel's intrigue has vanished for people like me who are coming into it knowing what it's about. Because I can see part of spoilers for everything Salem Slot in this episode, of course. But the way that the book is structured, it does presuppose that you don't know it's going to be about vampires. And I do wonder how that must have played for people who read it for the first time, not knowing anything about it. Were you even aware it was going to be about vampires when you first read it?
Yeah, because someone told me it's like this cool book about vampires. So yeah, it was spoiled for me that way. But I can see how this could be like played for a surprise, because it takes a while before before certain things become obvious. Although, like, if you read your Dracula, then you can kind of quickly figure it out.
Yeah. And that was also the inkling, right, of Stephen King himself. I was teaching literature in high school. He was teaching Dracula, and he was just like, what would happen if Mr. Dracula came from Transylvania, traveled all over the Atlantic, and just happened to move to a very, very tiny town in Maine, which also blends in and puts in elements of Shirley Jackson explicitly mentioned. And maybe because I read it just last year, but I did really love We've Always Lived in the Castle, which kind of has that small town element to it. That's also in other Shirley Jackson stories. So there were definitely some interesting parallels that I was drawing there. But this element of the vampire has been what has endured the most with Salem Slot, we could say. It's what people always think about. Where does this stand for you? Just as a vampire story, as part of just horror literature.
Well, see, this is an interesting thing, because first and foremost, I think that this is, again, like an example of like when people don't quite necessarily know how to. Okay, well, this is me. Like, back up for a few seconds, Jakub. Just get your stuff together, But I'll put it politely. Like, Stephen King, for many people, maybe not anymore, because now he's kind of like one of those sort of authors who've always been there. Because he's been like publishing like one book a year at least since mid-70s without fail. Even when he was struggling through many addictions, he was still very, very productive, right? But his biggest shtick, and this is something that people have criticized in the past, specifically when he was trying to transition into, call it, literary fiction, like with Dolores Claiborne and Gerald's Game. He was trying to move from genre to something a little bit more prestige, something a bit more sophisticated. And like literary critics are snobs, so they'll be just like, stay in your lane, Steve, stay in your lane, but his biggest shtick was the sort of the what if scenario. The biggest coolest thing that he would always do, on top of, well, would be a combination of, what if something, what if Dracula came to my town? What if the kid at the back of the class was a telekinetic? What if my car was possessed? What if this hotel was haunted? And that kind of stuff was always kind of like let's just say a trigger for a story. And then the other thing was, what mattered to him would be, give the story a cast of characters and then treat them kind of like they were ants in a terrarium, as in like, oh, I built you this thing. See what you do with it,
Let's live, survive, do your thing.
And at the same time, and I think, and this is me being a little bit like, I'm not sure whether I'm correct in this. This is kind of my assumption. This is kind of coming in the mid-70s, where horror, just both in literature and in film, horror comes like, okay, well, before, I want to say like 1960s, horror and science fiction were kind of sort of indistinguishable from one another in many ways. It was either like horrors were either gothic stories or of hauntings and like Dracula and whatever, right? Or more science or more breaching towards science fiction. Like Stephen King is on record as being a massive Richard Matheson fan, for instance, right? I suppose guys like Ray Bradbury. I don't know if you've ever read Something Wicked This Way Comes. It's kind of like a horror story, but a little bit weird, about this sort of like traveling circus coming to your town, and this circus being ran essentially by some guy who's kind of like a close approximation of Satan, you know, something to that effect, right? But the 70s is kind of where horror comes to your hometown, to your neighborhood, because William Peter Blatty writes The Exorcist. Ira Levin writes Rosemary's Baby. Then there's Carrie. There's The Omen as well. So there's a bunch of books that kind of bring these sort of, let's just call them canonical ideas to your neighborhood. As in, like, what if your neighbor's kid was possessed by Pazuzu? You know, what if your wife was pregnant with Satan, you know, or something to that effect? Or like, again, like kind of like, what if the kid at the back of the class was an X-Man, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Or an ex-woman. It was a girl. But so this kind of just comes with like an interesting shift, because then the vampire lore, which, like, if you think vampires, you think Dracula, you think Nosferatu, and this brings about this of the gothic imagery, a certain specific aesthetic. It all just comes to your mind immediately as you say the word Dracula.
Very
And now,
European, very old, dusty castles.
That's exactly right. Like, and even within, like, I don't know, like, if you look at movies, and that's also something. Apologies for ranting. Stephen King is also, let's not forget, one of the first writers of his generation, or of one of the most, well, let's just say, first most successful writers of a generation raised on television. So these would be guys who first saw Bambi before they read something.
Yeah. Probably watched the Dracula before he read it. Even
he probably watched, the 1929 Dracula. He probably watched the Hammer films when he was young. He probably went to see the Hammer films at drive-ins, just to kill time. So I see this, like, it kind of presents this interesting shift, because it brings these ideas. It almost I don't know, together with all these other bits of work, both in books and in movies, just gives horror permission to exit the confines of what you think is acceptable aesthetics for them.
Yeah, part of the appeal, I think, of Stephen King as well is that he's, inside each man there's two walls, and inside Stephen King there's the literature professor who has this knowledge of like like literary classics, the way books are supposed to be about something, quote unquote. You could say in a pretentious way, but just getting a bit too lost maybe in themes, in trying to say something with her books. But then he also has this love for pulp, love for the kids today would say trash, but I hate that term. Just love for genre heavy stories, the what ifs you were talking about. And that I think in Salem's Lot is still fine-tuning it. I think that the horror elements in here are very strong. Whenever it describes the vampires, especially leading up to the first big reveal of the kid floating outside of the window, everything is so ambiguous that it is quite unnerving. People are hearing voices. These two kids are lost in the woods. Just bursts of violence happen out of nowhere, and then we quickly pass on to whatever the hell is happening on the other side of town. It's a nice build up, a nice ramp up, where then on the flip side of that, you have the character writing, which I think is a bit uneven. I don't know how you feel about him. I'm not a fan of Ben Mears as a character. Ben Mears, the protagonist, we could say, essentially like the hero, also of sorts, of the book. Um, just I don't know. I don't really care for him. I'm not a fan of the entire way that the romance with Susan Norton is set up. You know, where she's just like reading, like this meet cute in the park. She's reading the book that he wrote. Oh my god! Also, the classic Stephen King self-insert. You know, the writer slash professor. Um, yeah, how do you feel about him? I'm not a fan, but there's more interesting characters, undeniably, in this book.
Look, I think he's just as interesting. I think he's interesting the way Jonathan Harker is interesting. You know, he's
As a catalyst of sorts.
yeah. So he's kind of like he responds to certain things. So what's more interesting to me as is not necessarily the characters themselves, but the scenarios in which they live. Because I think even the sort of like I don't want to derail your sort of like train of thought, because for me, and this book is not necessarily about well, you could say this as in like this is Dracula comes to Maine with Ben Mears being Jonathan Harker, Burke being essentially Van Helsing, Susan Norton. See, this is where it's like Susan Norton is Lucy and Mark Petrie is Mina. The little kid is Mina.
They ride off into the sunset together.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So that's kind of the twist on that. It's just sort of like gender reversal.
You have the Renfield with Starker. He's the familiar.
Straker is
Straker, sorry.
Yeah,
Straker.
he's the familiar sort of Renfield character. There's yeah. so there's like Father Callahan, maybe I can't remember if he would be like Seward or something. I don't know. So you can actually just like if you wanted to, you could say like take the like the structural sort of framework of Dracula and map it onto this, and then say like that makes sense. It's kind of like a fun little exercise to do. So for me, these and of course, like, okay, well, write what you know. So if you want to write yourself into the story, then of course the writer is going to be the author, so he sees himself as the hero of this, and I have no problems with that. It's fine. Like
It's
many
charming.
people do this.
It's charming.
Yeah, because for me, what really gives this story the heartbeat is not necessarily these characters, but the fact that these characters interact with the world around them, and the fact that the author shows me things that happen in this town, like regardless of whether the vampire is there. Because that's kind of something that I think, like I see all the adaptations of this book. I hear people talk about this book. I read essays about this, and I wrote my own little thing about it, and then I found Clive Barker is probably the only person I found who gets it the way I think I get it, and the way I think Stephen King's intention may have been, which is this movie is about a town that's already corrupt. There's evil in it. And it's not that this evil is kind of like confined to this Marston house where like whatever, like this ex-hitman, assassin, I don't know, some kind of like a gangster lived there. I mean, I didn't, God knows what, depending on which adaptation you watch. There's like, I don't know, some accusations of different crimes that would be horrendous for their time, kind of following this house. But for me, this is kind of the interest comes in say that Ben Mears comes into a town to deal with darkness in him, right? Because he has something to sort out, because he has some kind of a history with this house. He has darkness in him because he let his wife die. So he needs to process some sins. And as he does so, and as you get invested in that, you also meet other people in this town. A guy who abuses his kid. Another
Which is probably
guy.
the hardest part to read. That entire character with his wife.
Yeah,
The constant crying of the child. It's
the guy who beats his wife, and the wife who beats her child to death, essentially. There's sort of the woman who cheats on her husband, and the husband who takes revenge on her by raping her. And this is all kind of as you and the trick is that this is kind of like a Renaissance fresco of all this horror, like from the depths of hell that Stephen King paints for you. And the trick is that all you want, but in this massive fresco, you focus on this vampire character, and you just almost want to disregard everything else, which I think is the message, where like we're caring about this evil from the outside, while we almost forget about how terrible these people are, and the characters like Susan, like all these people I know, like they maybe some of them are like weirdly underwritten, or maybe they're let's not forget, like this is an early novel. This guy's what, like in his mid-20s when he writes it. Fair enough. This is, I think, his 6th novel,
Including the Bachman ones, you mean?
because he wrote apparently, so maybe 6 novels. He wrote at least 2 unpublished novels before it that remain unpublished, and he wrote Blaze, Rage, and
Harry?
Carrie, and one more, possibly The Long Walk.
Oh, okay. Also Bachman, right?
He then published them as Richard Bachman after that.
Okay.
So Rage and The Long Walk and Roadwork and then The Running Man were published as Richard Bachman after that, but most of them were written before Carrie was published.
Okay.
So this is a guy who, and actually when he was pitching, I think, Salem's Lot to his publisher, he had 2 books, 2 manuscripts. So he said he had Blaze, Blaze was published in like mid-2000s. So he kept it in his drawer for a very long while, and he rewrote sections of it as well. So he had Blaze and he had Salem's Lot, and they both agreed Salem's Lot is the better book. But the danger was like, you publish this and it becomes a success, there will be a danger you will forever be seen as a horror writer.
Which turned out to be true, I would say, at least for the general audiences. You say Stephen King is the master of horror.
Well, my take on him is like he has eras. He is a master of horror, and then he's a master of drama, and now he's like a king of horror, king of drama, king of crime.
Okay.
Because like his recent books are more kind of like crime, capers, thrillers. He kind of just transitions into that sort of space. But yeah, I would say like the characters in here, just to come back, apologies for ranting. And for those who don't know me, but Nicole started saying like, this is going to be a long episode. It's because I'm here and I have a tendency to rant unopposed. Apologies.
There's a lot to talk about, to be honest. We didn't choose Carrie as a conversation.
With like 5 movies and a musical. Because like, by the way, like the journey I'm on, right, it's kind of not only just going through all of his books one by one, but also catching up with every single adaptation of everything that I happened to read. So when I was reading Night Shift, it took me months to go through Night Shift because there's, I want to say at this point, 11 sequels to Children of the Corn.
Oh my God, oh no.
And some of them are worse than others, and none of them are really good.
I can imagine.
So, but anyway, so characters like Susan, for instance, maybe are underwritten, but what's interesting to me is the dynamic between her and her mom and her and her dad. Like they sort of like have a very awkward, I think, an interaction where she invites him over for some kind of a meal, and her father just like interrogates him, like, "Are you a serious man? Are you a serious man?" You know, they have these like expectations. You can already see, oh, maybe they have this sort of family dynamic where this young woman, when she says, "Oh, I want to leave for New York," it's not that she wants to leave and have a career. She wants to escape the prison she's in, you know, because her parents are overbearing and manipulative and toxic, and that's kind of where you see like Petrie's sort of parents are kind of like the most normal. However, he doesn't necessarily have a good relationship with any of them because they're kind of a bit withdrawn. The Glick brothers are a bit like, everyone has some kind of a dynamic going on that King just shines a little bit of light on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excusing the fact that these people are a lot of them kind of are written in very broad strokes because it's a large cast of characters, but because the color and the texture is underneath the characters, because they're kind of like windows into different pockets of this town and then this town then comes alive in these chapters, as you said, that are titled just The Lot, where you almost feel like the sort of the god's eye view of just peering into people's windows and seeing all the crimes and all the abuse and all the horror that's happening without all the vampires being there, because someone gets abused, someone gets beaten, someone gets raped. It's terrible, right? But anyway, so that's kind of how I totally excuse him, but then again, I also have a strong bias for this book.
No, understandably so. And I think that's the moment where it clicked, when I said it's grown on me. Especially after watching all of the adaptations, I appreciate what King did with the book even more. With just letting all of this breathe. And that's one of the things I really like about him as a writer, is that some would say self-indulgent, yes, but I don't necessarily see it as a negative in something like Salem's Lot. I like, even like The Stand, I like when he just like slows down and lets us spend time with characters. Is very much disinterested in plot, to the point that some parts are a bit repetitive in a way, we could say. But overall, no. And I totally understand also why it has the legacies that it does as a book. First of all, because it did bring vampires to America. And it brought vampires to the modern age. These are not the vampires from, like you were saying, the European Gothic castles, but these are vampires that live alongside, Vietnam newsreel footage on TV and things like that.
At the same time, like when you say he's disinterested in plot, this is a very correct statement to make, because this is a guy who does not plot. He actively believes that the thing that ruins a book is plot. So, and he doesn't plan any of his books, and I suppose this is his biggest accusation that his critics would probably level at him, that just like a lot of his books really botch the landing. Because at some point he just runs out of energy and he goes like, I suppose we have to like wrap this up somehow. And his endings tend to be either underwhelming or over the top, or just out of whack, out of sync, out of step, out of turn, right?
Which I don't mind in Salem's Lot. I mean, I wouldn't say it's actually a poor ending. I think it's a pretty good ending, especially because it comes full circle with the opening, this very mysterious prologue. It's like there's a tall man, the kid, they're not father and son. It's like, who are these characters? I didn't remember anything about the movie, to be honest, when I started reading it. So I was like, I don't know who these characters are. I forgot. At least the kid. And then once you get to the actual ending, it all comes back together, and it's Mark Petrie and it's Ben Mears, and they come back to Jerusalem's Lot and burn it to the ground, letting the vampires roam free without a house anymore. Which has a sense of sadness to it.
Did you read the called
One for the Road?
No. The deleted sort of
the deleted
scenes.
scenes. I didn't read the deleted scenes.
See, that's an interesting thing, because you could see how because like King writes the way like George R.R. Martin writes, although by the time George R.R. Martin just like he just George R.R. Martin finishes a chapter, then this guy finishes a book, So, but he writes in the same way, as in he just lets it happen, and then he sometimes realizes, I think these characters didn't go the way it would be useful for them, so he will have to then just rewrite whole sections, because he needs them to backtrack, right? So there's like sections where I think Barlow dies in different ways, because he figures out, like, I think can't remember now which one's the real deal, which one's the removed ones, because either they just drag him out into the sun and he burns. I think that's the one that's in the actual book, or the rats eat him. Oh no, yeah, exactly. So he stabs him, and then there's another one where rats eat him. So and because also like King has a thing for rats, as in
he does like rats, yeah.
Because I think he's just afraid of them. He finds them scary.
Fair.
And they are quite scary in large numbers, like anything in large numbers. Chickens in large numbers would be scary.
But yeah, no, it's a fascinating book. It's a book that captured people's interest, allured them, and of course, studios saw money potential in it, which leads us to the first adaptation of Salem's Lot. Came out in 1979, a 2-part TV special directed by none other than Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Tobe Hooper. And it is thanks to the success of the Salem Slot adaptation, that he would end up doing more studio jobs, starting with the Funhouse in '81 and then going onward with not that much of a successful career, unfortunately, I would say. But how do you feel, Jakub, about Salem's Lot, this classic, I would say even iconic TV movie? In some ways, it has almost surpassed for people the novel, at least visually, right?
Oh, come on. Really?
That's when people
Because
think of Barlow, and that's one key difference that we didn't mention. But like the vampire, when Stephen King said Dracula comes to town in Maine, it didn't mean just generic vampire. It
no, it's
meant
Bela Lugosi.
Bela is like the charismatic leader, which also feels like a precursor to Randall Flagg. But that's a conversation from maybe another time. Like this embodiment of evil corrupting the town, or like bringing to light the corruption that you were talking about. But um, what they do with, of course, the 1979 version, they think, we've seen it before. We've had was it like Frank Langella, Dracula, like a couple of years prior,
Hmm.
in the 70s. You had the entire Christopher Lee ones that were like, people have seen that. We're gonna go back to Nosferatu, baby. Make him bold, make him scary, make him mute, make him a proper creature of the night. So, what are your feelings on this adaptation, Jakob? I'm very curious.
Look, this is something I don't like. Like, I really don't like this film. And it's not
Oh,
look, this is like to the tune of like 2.5 out of 5. This is kind of as far as I can go. However, there are interesting things about it because it takes a few liberties with the book in terms of how it treats itself tone wise. Because like Tobe Hooper eventually just turns it into like it goes from like a Hallmark soap opera into like a Hammer horror film.
yeah.
So I can see the allure of that, but at the same time, this thing is like 3.5 hours long, and it's boring. Like it's really I read the book and I'm transfixed because there's so many things happening sort of simultaneously, and in here it kind of feels like this book takes like it just spins in neutral. It's just doesn't have momentum because at the same time, and I think this is weirdly enough, like King apparently liked it. He goes like, "That's a good television film," because I suppose in 1979, doing anything for television would be heavily sanitized as well. Like
For
they
their
kind of have to remember.
standards, this was.
Yeah, but like, is it what's the guy's name? Who plays Ben Mears, Starsky and Hutch guy?
Oh, David
Jesus.
Soul.
David Soul.
Oh my god.
Terrible. Poor man's Klaus Kinski.
Can you
like,
imagine?
he looks like Klaus Kinski after like I don't know after digital de-aging, but someone gave him a sedative, you know. It's
Yeah.
really bad. I don't like, and I like look, I get it. It's just like what Tobe Hooper going like, and I think that maybe producer who says like let's turn this vampire into Nosferatu. This will be cool. And like, yeah, but but at the same time, it's missing the point of the book, right? And I suppose, like, and I don't want to chastise a film for not doing the book justice because with Stephen King, a lot of the films that actually do the book justice are terrible films because they're paced to the tune of the book. And I've always seen this as like I have like 3 weeks to read this, right? Meanwhile, I have like 3 hours to watch that, so it has to be paced differently. Certain sacrifices have to be made. I get it, but at the same time, they're like a good screenwriter and a good director will figure out where the soul of the book is or the material. They will reflect on this for long enough to figure out. Oh, I get it. This movie is supposed to be about this town essentially rotting away, right? And they don't get it across at all. Just one bit.
It's one long funeral, you could say, the entire story of Salem's Lot.
Yeah, and they don't get it across at all.
It feels like this was my second time watching it. The first time I liked it, but rereading even my review from like 2017 or something, like it's been a while. I definitely liked the final portion. Also, not knowing anything, it was my first time experiencing the plot of Salem's Lot.
Mhm.
But rewatching it, it was a struggle. I have to say, I have to be honest. I don't dislike
Watching
it,
it late
but
at
neither
night.
do I like it. Oh no, you can watch this late at night. I
No,
also had to watch it compared to the first time. I actually had to split it into like 1 hour chunks each, and it
Mhm.
still felt very sluggish. The pacing of it. Um, I don't want to say that nothing happens in it, but I don't know. Like it's so interesting to see what characters they decided to focus on. They spend so much time setting up this the cuck. That's what I call him. You know the you have the character of the um how do you call him? Like the guy who sells the house of the Marstons,
Oh Jesus,
the
what's
real
his name?
estate agent.
Oh, is it
Josh
Larry? Jesus
something.
Christ, what's his
Yeah.
name?
So many characters.
What is his name? What is his name?
Larry Crockett.
Crockett.
Yeah,
Is it Crockett or Cricket? Crockett. Crockett.
Yeah, you have
Yeah.
Larry Crockett who's having an affair with the secretary, and there's the husband who finds out. It's like that whole thing. It's like where I mean, it's a nice sequence, you know, when the husband barges in. It's also present in the book, but just I don't know. Is that what you want to be focusing on right now? The entire meet cute. I do like Bonnie Bedelia, poor woman. She does the best she can as Susan Norton, but the entire meet cute in the film is even worse than it is in the book between her and Susan, and between her and Ben Mears. Um, it's messy. It's messy. But if you had to like narrow it down to just one good thing about this film and one bad thing, which would they be?
The one good thing about this film is the sort of the audacity to give it like a Hammer horror film vibe towards the end, where they invade the house. The the Marston, not monster. The Marston house has like a horror film set sort of energy to it, where you kind of feel
And they
like now it's
save
kind
it.
of
Like they,
yes.
they don't show it early on. Like you have to wait for the final
Yeah.
act of the film to actually enter that place.
So that's kind of where it becomes something. Like it just looks like okay, because for the longest time this movie this sort of this adaptation doesn't take a swing. You know, it just tries to like stick to the story, stupid. Just stick to the story. Like at the same like for the longest time, and I have nothing against the guy, but Mick Garris could have directed it, and I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. You know.
Fair, fair.
And then it takes this sort of turn, and just like, oh, now you can see that Tobe Hooper is actually making choices in here. There are certain visual cues, there are ideas that they maybe are not in the book, but at least they're interesting.
Yeah,
Like
you have
even the
James
fact that
Mason chewing the scenery a little bit and having fun.
yeah, and then at the same time, like while I don't appreciate the sort of idea of like turning this guy into essentially like poor man's Nosferatu, because also has like the connotation of Nosferatu being a knockoff of Dracula, and so now you're just doing a knockoff of a knockoff of a knockoff of a knockoff, right? I get maybe that's kind of part of the joke, but at least it's something.
And what
So
about
that's
something bad, man?
that's a good thing. Oh, just David Soul, can someone just take him behind the shed? Like, come on.
I love that.
This
That's
guy.
actually that's
This
my bad thing as well, because I told you I don't like Ben Mears as a character that much, and having
He's not
him.
helping.
No, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. To the point that I want to say every single other scene without him is okay at best. But whenever he's on screen, I don't know, charisma vacuum, man. Charisma vacuum.
And the hair on this guy.
You know
Yikes.
it's 1979, baby.
Oh,
You know it's
baby.
1979.
The hair on this guy.
He looks like the singer from what's his name? Like the Who, right? Like
Maybe.
Tommy.
It's just like some people who will like start losing their hair because they can see that he's just like his forehead's exceptionally tall, but they still insist on having long hair. Someone should have stepped in and said like, look, it's not gonna happen.
Put on this wig.
Just, you know, nice and short, and eventually dome. Just shave it all off. Just
Own it.
own it. Respect yourself.
One thing that I do like though about this adaptation is the ending. not only do they use the book's opening, like mysterious opening of Ben Mears and Mark Petrie in the cars, like what's happening, who are these guys, you're just like boom, following the King book in that sense. But in the ending they actually change, since they decide to focus so much on the love story between Ben Mears and Susan Norton. Instead of having her die like 2/3 of the way through, like it is in the book. I don't even know if that's the actual length, but like she dies way before the climax against Barlow, the devilish Barlow. In the film, they save it for the epilogue, where they've run away from Salem Slot. They've burned the town and they're being hunted by the vampires who want to get them. And who turns up at their doorstep? It's Susan Norton. So they have this nice little climax. I don't like the character of Van Mears, of course, but I do think that just like you were saying, the Nosferatu choice makes sense as a studio decision. I think to have that be the final scene, where it's like, the final thing, the final act of bravery, of true manliness that he has to do is to sacrifice, it's just like accept that the woman he loved is gone and he just has to kill her. He has to be the better man, that type of thing. Makes sense. And I think it's actually a nice way of concluding this 3 hour plus snooze.
For like a 3 hour plus snooze, by the way, they don't get one thing across, which is in the book, and I kind of like it. The sort of like John Carpenter's vampire kind of thing, where there's a moment, I think, like a few chapters where Mark Petrie and Ben Mears essentially just take on like a job. They just make sticks and then just go around town killing vampires. Just
They're
one by one, just very methodically taking them out of like their shadow to burn them into the ground, or just to stick sticks in their chest.
Which is also, I want to say, very upsetting imagery.
Yeah. Yes.
There's something so matter of fact. I think you said it as a job, and that's a perfect description of it. They're just like going through it. The humanity has left these people, but not, or more so than the humanity, their soul has left them. But there's something still slightly human to them, which is an interesting take on the vampire, which is not super present. Like in the film, the way they do it, it's, the classic, they just want to suck your blood, and that's it. Like even with the little floating kids, which is one of the most maybe the most memorable scene from the film that has gone beyond Salem Slot as a property.
The sort of the little, is it Danny Glick floating behind the window? Yeah, I suppose that's kind of the
Mark just like scratching on the.
Yes.
I remember, I want to say it was like either Watch Mojo or like those early 2010s of YouTube. I remember that was the first time I've ever even seen anything about Salem Slot, was people talking about like one of the top 10 best vampire scenes. Oh my god, it's so scary, the scratching. Like it's in the zeitgeist, I would say, more so than anything else. In
the Ryersons sort of in Ben Mears' room upstairs. No, but not Ben Mears' room upstairs. Matt Berg's room upstairs. That's kind of also kind of a scene that you kind of see regurgitated a lot. Although in the book it's way scarier, because there's just a whole element of pages upon pages of tension.
The sounds that they're hearing and just like getting closer to it, like he's dead. I saw him dead. It's just like, oh man, it's a great sequence in the book.
But yeah, there's something to it. Like when they go about exterminating essentially the town, like one by one, there's an element of almost pity for them. But this is like, I think this is something that, well, at least I kind of get out of the book, where there's this sort of bitter sweetness to it, because there's pity for these people because they have to, well, just be dispatched as vampires, but at the same time you remember that these people are also horrible. So it's kind of like,
they're all,
I don't know, like there's
humans. They're all flawed people.
Well, some of them are criminals, like a guy who's
the rapist and the
yeah. So there's an element of ambiguity baked into the book that I think Tobe Hooper's adaptation just doesn't necessarily grasp.
Yeah. It's very simplistic, which again, at the end of the day, it is a 1979 made for TV movie. Is that an excuse though? No, it isn't. I'm actually surprised you don't like this one. So I'm curious how you feel about the 2004 adaptation. which came out directed by Michael Salomon, starring Rob Lowe, Rutger Hauer, Donald Sutherland, Andrew Brower, the Great
James
Lake,
Cromwell.
James Cromwell, Samantha Mathis. Like it's a cast for 2004. The biggest difference here being that it's set in modern times, which I was not expecting. How do you feel about this retelling? Even I don't even want to say it's an adaptation; it's a retelling of sorts.
I mean, I think it's within reason to set things. Look, if you want to do a period like a period piece, then you kind of just we're gonna get to the 2024, right? But
It's around the corner.
just that I can't wait. But this is the one, and this is you're gonna be surprised. This is one I actually do like because I think this is the one adaptation that actually comes closest, even though it still takes liberties. Because like Donald Sutherland is not how I imagined Straker to look like or to behave like, but he has fun with his character.
He sure does. Bless him.
Um,
Also, the
Rutger
rating
Hauer.
rate.
Yeah, Rutger Hauer is actually quite interesting in there, and I think this is the story that actually just gets, I think, close to selling you on the fact that this town is really terribly morbid. I think that's kind of what Tobe Hooper failed to grasp. However, this movie is also like beholden or maybe enthralled to the fact that it's made for TV in 2004. So there's budgetary restrictions. This has to be cut to the beats of commercials. It has to be limited in certain ways, in ways that in certain things that you can or can't show. I mean, I suppose 70s was the same, and certain things have to happen because it's the regard for the time. So some CGI effects have to be present, and they're not very good.
They're not.
No, and at the same time, I want to say like the biggest thing that really misses the mark for this the change is the fact that Father Callahan in the book is one of the most tragic characters in the story, and is kind of treated as an excuse to have a framing device, and I'm not a fan of that. The framing device in there is kind of like if you're gonna ask me about what's the bad thing about about this adaptation, is the framing device could really go. Like it's just like, let me tell you a story, and this all orderly, like holding a mop or whatever, goes like, okay, let me just listen for 4 hours then,
Someone comes to take like, you should take a break, man. No, 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 no. Story's getting good now. Let me stay for another 2 hours here. Just
Just
listening
goes like
to
half of his shift, he's just sitting in his room.
And everyone's fine with it, of course. It's a scathing statement towards America's sanitation, the
Yeah.
health system.
Health service in America, yikes. Yeah, but like this is kind of the adaptation of this book that I kind of enjoy the most because I think it gets the most out of the energy and vibe of the book. I think it's the closest to where I think King was.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Like looking past the shot, I didn't know this was set in modern times, like in post 9/11, explicitly so. America after that weird like opening chase scene
Yep.
where Ben Pierce is
I know.
finding Father Callahan in Chicago. Where did they even say they were like in one big city in the north? I think maybe or Boston. Just like okay. After that, once you get into the flow of things, you have the narration, which sometimes I want to say that sometimes it has a couple direct quotes from King's own writing. Correct me if I'm wrong, though, but it felt similar, at least in style.
Yeah.
Ben Mears just describing the town. I would say that's what I really like. If I have to pick like the good, I would say I really like the actual feeling of ensemble here. I think the actors are generally well cast. Also, the side characters, you spend quite a bit of time actually um, with like I forget the name of the characters, like the two guys who get the coffin essentially of
Oh, I
Barlow.
forgot their names though.
There's the dad, like the mentally challenged guy who Barlow seduces. There's all the little like the daughter of the guy and the women, and Susan Norton. I think Samantha Matthews does a very fine job here as that character. Even Rob Lowe, who I'm not a fan of, but I enjoy him. I think he gets the darkness of Ben Mears across very well. Maybe a bit
Mhm.
too moody, too intense sometimes, but it still works.
It's 2004 Goth, you know?
Yeah. It's like pre-supernatural. It has that vibe to it.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, that's exactly right.
my
Pre-supernatural
my
vibe.
absolute favorite, though, with like a bullet, I love Andrew Brower in this as Matt Burke. I would say probably Matt Burke in the book is my favorite character. It just has like this nice charm to him. It's like this professor is a bit more down to earth, who's also super into vampires and just doing a lot of literature reading. He's like, vampires are here. Let me do my research, okay? But
It's the
Andrew Brower
exposition machine.
is the exposition. Is the Van Helsing?
Yes.
They
Yeah,
say
yeah.
it.
Andrew Brower is very good. Love him.
He's great, and they add this element of like making him a closeted gay man, which at first when they imply it in the openings, I was like, this can go very poorly. But actually, it leads to a very nice extra layer to him, especially when confronted with the first vampire. Just all these things. I will say maybe Rutger Auer, which is a weird complaint to have, but I would actually use it as a positive in its own twisted way. Barlow, the character of Barlow in this TV movie, I like that they have him be the actual, the elegant, seductive man. Of course, Rutger Hauer has a lot of charisma. Apparently, there were also a lot of behind the scenes issues with getting him to say his lines and not ad lib and actually do what he was paid to do. But he also feels very much underutilized. Maybe because it is Rutger Hauer, you just expect such a big name to be used more. Maybe also because of the nature of the show, they couldn't afford to use more of him. It does play into which is what they say about like the positive and the negative. It does play into the mystique of the character. You don't spend too much time with him; it doesn't lose his appeal in a way. His horror, but also I wish he was more present in the 3 hours.
Yeah, because I think like what they get out of Rutger Hauer is the fact that he's kind of like weirdly magnetic, and that's kind of what I think how King wrote him, because he was supposed to be like this Bela Lugosi, this like I don't know, like a slick, charming, mysterious foreigner, and I think they get it across because like in like Tobe Hooper's adaptation goes like foreigner but kind of scary and smelly, you know. It's just like
Yeah.
it's a demon from abroad, which I think it's like a much more crass sort of interpretation. I feel like this is much more interesting because you can almost imagine how Susan could fall for him or just fall under his spell. Like he puts people under his spell, and that's kind of what comes across in more interesting in here. So like I really like Howard in here. Howard is just generally a great actor.
He's also, speaking of vampires, he was in Dracula 3D, the only good thing about that Dario Argento turd of a film.
Dario
I didn't see-
Argento.
So Dario Argento. I do have like my negative about this show might be a bit weird. Am I reaching? Maybe. I think you might say, Nick, you are full of bullshit on this thing.
Uh-oh.
I'm not a fan of the modern day setting.
Really?
In a way that just there's something that feels a bit weird where they talk about, there's such an emphasis on being like, I sent you an email. It's just like reminding you we have the internet. You do this thing. And they talk about the Afghan war. And they bring so much so they talk so much about contemporary references to post 9/11 that I started to wonder. The vampire is usually seen as this outside foreign force that comes in. That's always been, especially like in modern times, the negative viewing, you could say, of the Dracula novel of Bram Stoker. It's the Romanian coming to steal our wives in the UK, and that's.
Do you think this is what Bram Stoker's view was?
Probably not, but also I can't deny that.
Pesky Romanians coming over to steal our wives.
I mean, have you seen their mustaches? Like Blood the Impaler had game. But no, but that's been a
Vlad the Impaler again.
You said it. You said it. I didn't. You're implying things now.
So bad.
But it is
But Jakub, stop it.
it is fair criticism, I would say. I don't. It's not something if I would like. I wouldn't destroy the novel because of this. Just inherent racism of the times. But watching this Salem Slot adaptation, I got lost into it, and I was like, post 9/11, they don't necessarily talk negatively about the Bush administration or anything about that. There's a Christian imagery. I was thinking, are the vampires like metaphors for Muslims and terrorists in this case? For like the good white Americans, because the black American gets killed, but the good white Americans using the power of Christ, uh, they can destroy this evil that is entering the community. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, because just the nature of King's book, which also came out in 75, was the Nixon administration, was its own conservative time as well.
I don't think
How
you're
do you feel
reaching.
about that? Because it never feels. There's even a point where early on, Ben Mears introduces himself to a bunch of like locals inside the house he's staying in, and one of them is like, "Oh yeah, I read your book about Afghanistan," and they're like, "Ah, you didn't serve in the troops, like you don't know what shit's truly like," or something like that, which didn't feel like just like Hicks being like that, but I don't know. How do you feel about this?
I don't think you're reaching. I think this is one of the reasons why I think this movie kind of comes close to what King intended without actually going there directly. Because I think if you apply this reading as in like so let's just say Barlow and Straker are essentially kind of the equivalent of a foreign invading terrorist force disrupting the peace of a small town America.
Yeah.
And then you have your main character who is like an agent of truth as well, because he's written books about, let's just say, some more uncomfortable aspects of what Americans don't like to necessarily know about. Then the idea of like also showing you that these people are not good people. They may have capacity for good, but what they choose to do is actually just be evil to one another, right? So this kind of encapsulates this idea, well, people banding together to repel foreign evil, while at the same time sometimes you remember these are not the good guys, and that's an interesting commentary, because you can say like, oh yeah, well, that kind of just makes it ambiguous and kind of sort of icky, because this book is icky,
Yeah.
right? Where it just makes you feel like these people are horrible. Like, why am I supposed to root for these? Like, what am I supposed to do with these characters? Because they have these terrible relationships, they have these terrible sins under their fingernails, and these people then go on like a vampire hunt.
You don't feel bad for them for turning.
Yeah. So there's a point of interest in here. So I don't think you're reaching. I think this kind of like, well, it kind of uses this opportunity to kind of be to let's just say use the thematic sphere in the book to say something about what was current at the time, find parallels between the two, and also do it in a form that's, let's just say, it has to be accessible to, let's just say, Friday night audiences, right? So
General viewers.
Yeah.
Prime time.
Because like there's a difference between people who are like, like there's a difference between the captive audience that paid for a ticket, went out of their house, put their shoes on, went into the car, drove for a little while, then came outside, bought popcorn and sat down, like willingly having paid for a ticket, versus people who have just channel surfed and said like, oh, that's interesting. So having something like this, like serve that kind of a curveball to a viewer in 2004, where people are still, let's just say, probably divided on certain aspects of American interventionism, is an interesting act. And I think this is why, one of the reasons why I find this particular adaptation quite interesting. It's not the best film ever, because it's just, look, there's
I mean, coming from the 79 one, it is very entertaining. Like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
things move along at a
For
brisk pace.
for a film that's 1 hour longer, you know, because like 2 times 2 hours, right?
No, they're both 3 hours, I think, actually.
Is it 3 hours?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. So it's so there's
Feels
that.
shorter.
It's it feels short. It feels more succinct, more to the point, and at the same time, I feel like it actually, again, like in terms of taking swings and making choices, it does make choices while also having fundamental respect to not necessarily the plot or the character development in the story, but to the spirit of what this book was about. Like on the Gems podcast, we now this year do a Mike Nichols filmography, and then one of the things I've come to learn about this guy was that he would marinate in the material he was dealing with, like directing or whatever, before he figured out, and he couldn't do a movie or a play before he figured out what it was about, to him, as in like this thing is about dying inside, when like The Graduate was about being alone and being at the bottom of the pool, you're by yourself, right? I feel like these people have sat down with this book and figured out, oh, this is what it's about. It's about this sort of ambiguous ickiness between having to root for people who are horrible because they actually happen to have to like repel an evil force, right? Or the ambiguity of feeling sorry for people who fall under the spell of some other evil while they're evil themselves. You know, because then you get to distinguish between your homegrown evil and a foreign evil. You know, and then this sort of conversation you kind of get to start while having this sort of distinction in your head, maybe quite revealing. And I think this is a very interesting conversation to start in 2004.
Which probably was 2003, I want to guess, when they shot it. Right?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. No, it is very compelling. Like, it had me going. Even then, I was thinking, like, is it actually a bad thing? No, it's just. I think it can easily be weaponized in one way or the other. I think it's like you're seeing it from a very bright side of the coin. I wonder if at the time maybe it was perceived from the darker side of the coin. It's like reinforcing some more nationalist propagandistic ideals, but it is at least it made me think in a way that I wasn't during the 79 version. And also, I had some good laughs, man. I mean, this ends with a cover of Painted Black during the end credits, which had me rolling. It's like this rock chord.
It's 2004, baby, you know?
Truly. Like you said, the goth face. This is the goth Salem slot. Not super big on the climax because they do recreate the climax of the book, which is Barlow being in the coffin underneath the I keep forgetting the name of the place, like the house where where Ben Mears is staying.
I can't remember. There's this moment, sort of like the boarding house.
The boarding house. Yeah.
Because they found, I think in the book they found there's
the chalk from
the Paul chalk, the Q chalk. Yeah.
Like it works okay in the book. I think it feels a bit weird in this adaptation, even though it is the more faithful one. I understand why in the 79 one they decided to have the full climax take place in the Marston house, but you know, it is what it is. An interesting curiosity, definitely very entertaining.
I suppose also the Marston house, I think there's an interesting change because they also have to introduce like the third kind of evil, that this sort of town has some kind of like an occult thing going on for itself, because in Marston, I think there's an inclination that he is kind of like a voodoo thing going on about him.
Devil worshipper and the sacrifices inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting. But speaking of interesting, maybe we do have one more proper adaptation to talk about. Came out in 2024, was originally supposed to come out in 2022, directed by Gary Dauberman, who is the man behind the screenplays of It Chapter 1 and 2, and some of the worst films in the Conjuring universe. Famously, this was supposed to be not a mini series, but it was supposed to be a 3-hour movie. It was like a final cut, 3 hours long, Warner Brothers looked at it and was like, "Nah, dog." They cut it down to under 2 hours, making it the shortest adaptation yet, and released it straight to HBO Max. I had the opportunity, I had the chance actually of watching it in the cinema when I was staying in Berlin last October, and I decided to do something else with my time. Maybe missed opportunity, who knows? What did you think, Jakub, of Salem's Lot Conjuring Edition?
It's bad. Like, it's bad. It's, like, when I was writing about this, because like also part of my journey was kind of just, well, like when I finish the book and I write and watch some of these adaptations, just like figure out if there's something I could write about this just as an exercise for myself. Holy Jesus. It is kind of like the thing I thought about was this is kind of like, I mean, like, one thing I was really angry about was that King endorsed this film. He goes like, no,
I mean, he gets money probably out of these endorsements.
yeah, I think this is
Definitely
kind of
gets
like
money out of the adaptation
the
existing.
mercantilistic sort of view of this would be kind of like there is a contract with a paycheck at the end of it dangling in front of his nose, and this is kind of like, yeah, it's a few $100,000 or maybe $50,000. I don't know, a lot of dollars for sending a few tweets. Sorry, posts.
Skits.
Skeets. When he was endorsing this movie, he was saying that, oh, it has like an old Hollywood vibes. I'm just like, what is he talking about?
That's because it's set in the 70s as opposed to 2004, I guess.
Yeah. But I think my kind of big sort of conceit for this is kind of like, this is kind of a remake or an adaptation that you get when someone plays telephone with this material, because it's just like you lose granularity and detail as you go along, and all of a sudden, like, all you have is these sort of like massive beats, as in like you get the Nosferatu guy, you get the let's just say the 1979 scenes with like the scratching at the window and whatever. So it's like it's the closest, and then this is a word I don't like to use lightly, because for me it's a slur. This is content. It's a C word. It's content.
Yeah.
Horrible.
I'm not that negative,
Should
actually.
have stayed on the shelf, this thing,
I want to play devil's advocate. I think there is something potentially good here. I think some things are not salvageable. I think the ending is not salvageable. But everything leading up to the climax, if it had that extra hour, like, you can just feel how stitched together this is. You have this opening credits that are setting up, the town's history, the Marston house, and everything, which is pretty nice. And then it just instantly like drops you in. Striker at the place. I need the sideboard to be moved, and the guys are moving the thing. It's like, oh, okay, we're already introducing Barlow. Okay. And then Ben Mears comes into town. Now you actually have a nice introduction. And then it just keeps jumping back and forth between characters. Some of them are never properly introduced. I think, for what it's worth, Lewis Pullman, I don't want to say he's my favorite Ben Mears, but he's definitely the most likable. He's just a nice guy. Just like a nice guy. Doesn't feel like Ben Mears.
No,
But
it
it's
does
just-
not look like him either. Like that. This is now I imagined him.
I mean, you know what he looks like? He looks like Patrick Wilson in the Conjuring films. Mackenzie Lee as Susan Norton. I think she's very cute. She's almost a bit too cute, maybe, for her own good. I would say that about most of the cast, to be honest. Like, maybe Bill Camp as Matt Burke. I think he was my standout in this. He's very charming, I guess. But just, you said content. I would say, yeah, it's just middle of when it works, it's middle of the road. My favorite thing, my best thing about this film is the cinematography. Occasionally it has that like cheap made for TV or like contemporary mid-range horror film look to it. But there are some thought out shots in here. There are moments where they create some nice transitions from like thing in the floor, it turns into the stairway and the clock and the family. Like, it's not just kind of randomly put together in the edit, at least conceptually. But the worst part about it is easily the pacing. It's just like jump and stop and start and slow and fast and this and that. With all of those jump scares, like constantly, like, oh, we
Mhm.
need the attention span, people, just like nothing's happening, remove the sound randomly. Barlow is behind someone, I guess. Why not?
Yep.
Just the bloody. Was he? I didn't have time to look at like behind the scenes. Was he made with CGI? It just looks plasticky. It looks
I don't
fake.
know if he was. I think. Oh,
Or maybe
Christ.
like enhanced in some way, but there was something weird about his face. It almost feels like they maybe had a different makeup
it's
on and then they just slightly changed it in post because it
because
looks
it's
so
Alexander.
clean.
Yeah, because it's Alexander Ward. I'm not sure. Yeah, whether there's. But yeah, I think I agree with you that there's like the biggest problem with that is the pacing, which is well, let's just say for me an indication that Gary Dauberman, he's one of those guys who just like looks at this book and is like, okay, well, there's a story, there's a plot, and what we care about is the plot, and they didn't get what the book was all about, so they disregarded what it was about because what they cared about were the beats that people would remember, wasn't like, the Glick Death, the window, the Mark Petrie just making a fake cross. I suppose these effects are kind of nice, like the glowing crosses and whatnot.
Sure. Having to create the cross in the morgue,
Yeah,
when the woman comes back to life.
that's actually an interesting scene. Like, but at the same time, like this is something that I think I remember from The Stand, and this is something I kind of resonate with a lot. This idea of like what I call backdoor fantasy,
Mhm.
where like King kind of likes that sort of stuff, where like so fantastical elements kind of creep into some kind of a reality through the back door, you know. So these elements of like crosses and sticks and whatever and stakes, and they just add to this, like they just slowly take over, but they forget about what the fact that that it's in the title. This is supposed to be about the town, and it isn't. It's yeah.
It's so sudden. There's
Yeah.
literally at one point everyone's there. The next scene, everyone's a vampire. It's like, what happened in between? Is that part of the 1 hour that was cut? Probably, I hope so. It's so jarring. Um, Even just
Yeah.
character choices, that they make sense in the book, but here it doesn't really make sense that Susan Norton would go by herself to the Marston house.
Mhm.
Why does she do that out of nowhere? She decides to do that. Mark Petrie's going there. Why not? Sure. Um, it's an interesting exercise in editing because not only do we have the actual adaptation element to it, where a screenwriter sits down and chooses what's actually important from the book to keep,
Yeah.
but then it's the editor who is forced to remove like 1 hour of film to be like, what's actually important to tell a cohesive story? They do the best they can, bless them. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I can justify so many of the film's problems by saying maybe it's better in the longer cut. I cannot justify having the climax of the film be this bombastic. Like, all of the vampires are hiding in their car trunks at the drive-in. And we're
Oh
gonna have a
God.
final confrontation there,
Oh goodness.
which is I don't use this word lightly. I think it's one of the stupidest things I've seen in a movie. Just like narratively, of like, why? It's so poorly set up. They have like one scene in the beginning of the movie where they're at the drive-in and that's it.
Mhm.
Like, was it too bad to have them stay in their houses? I guess. It's less cinematic. Maybe it makes it, at least narratively, it makes it easier to be like, we just put them all in one place. We can take them all out in that place.
Maybe it sounded better as an elevator pitch. Like, what if we had this sort of like drive-in scene, and there's this shadow, kind of because the sun's setting, and these people have to hide in the sunlight. Oh my God! Oh, it's gonna be, and then
I
they
have
film
heard
it,
of
and it's not
this.
good.
I had heard of this. Like, I remember when the movie came out, people were talking about this driving ending. I think maybe even you wrote it in your article.
Hmm?
But I remember reading about it, and just in my mind, I could picture it in a okay way. I was like, maybe they're playing like the creature from the Black Lagoon or some movie like that.
They probably
I was
play. I
thinking
can't remember, what did they play? Like Final Destination 5? No, because it's in the 70s.
in here they play nothing. They don't even show the
They
screen
don't
when
even
they're
show the
watching
screen.
it.
They probably
No.
didn't have. They probably didn't have the rights to anything, so it's just like, well, save money.
Huh.
Just no,
It's
nothing's playing in there.
it's just Warner Brothers. They can't afford to show any movie from their
Yeah.
backlot. No, it's very disappointing. It's very, very disappointing. They once again bring it all down to this romance, which again, I don't. That's the main problem with the 79 version. It's the main problem here as well. Like, this doesn't need to be a romance. Like you said, this is about Salem's Lot. This is not about Ben Mears having to learn to sacrifice a woman. They also completely remove his tragic backstory or anything like that. They make him like generic good guy writer who comes back to his hometown to write a book. And that's kind of it. There's none of the drama, there's none of the intensity that comes with it. No, it's very, very disappointing. I don't think it's terrible. I just think it's just so bland.
And in which makes it terrible, because for a book that's this colorful, this rich, and this sort of, let's just say, ambiguously sort of like, let's just say, like, it just gives you so many avenues to pursue, so many points where you can swing to go to look at this book and say, you know what I'm gonna do? Just cut straight down the middle of the road, because gotta play it safe. It's almost it's offensive to me.
Do you have at least one good thing?
Hard to find. Like, one, if I had to find a good thing, it would be probably like, I like the morgue scene in every single, I think, I mean, in the 2004, I think it's interesting, but
it's cute what they do there. The pulling off. It's
yeah.
nice. Here they make it almost like the nun when she wakes up and she's covered in the white cloth.
I kind of feel like that's the sort of moment where they're kind of like in the zone that they want to be in, which what you said in the beginning of this was like the Conjuring science, Salem's Lot.
Oh yeah, Christianity is a superpower in these films, and that's what they turn it into here.
Yeah, but I do like the sort of the glowing cross. I don't know, and I like the fact that they actually just they turn they make Mark Petrie a black character, which is like fair enough, because I'm not sure if it's in the book it's specified. It's kind of assumed it's a kind of white American town.
Yeah, and even the Dr. Cody, they have Alfred Woodward. Woodard.
Yes.
So it's like a gender switch, and even like making her a black woman.
Yeah,
that's nice.
It's interesting. But yeah, it's kind of hard to like this, like any out of this, because I was, maybe I'll reserve judgment. Not reserve judgment, but I'll reserve the right to change my mind if I ever get my hands on some kind of a director's cut of this.
Release the Dauberman cut.
Yes.
Ask David
Zaslav. Hashtag release the Dauberman cut.
I don't think it's gonna get much traction, to be honest.
Like, kind of like we had a conversation with Randy about Spike Lee's Old Boy, and I think there's an Old Boy somewhere that actually works a bit better, even with Sharlto Copley still being in it, because like, as you said, like there are choices that the screenwriter makes, and there are choices that the editor makes, possibly while the producer breathes down their neck, right? It's like, needs to be shorter than this. We're not releasing this at all, unless this happens. And people are saying like, Jesus, Steve, can you? I assume the editor's name was Steve. It probably wasn't Steve. Let's just double check.
Yeah, let's be proper.
Look, hey, look. You need to edit this down to 1 hour and 49. Okay. How do I do this? I know, like, let's just make sure that this story makes some kind of fundamental sense. But they're like, but we're losing all the heart and soul of this. Well, it's either this or we're shelving this whole thing, and people worked on this. And I suppose, like, Mackenzie Lee would like to have a credit, things of that nature. So maybe there's a film in there worth watching. Maybe there's a stealth best Salem's Lot adaptation somewhere in the movie that they butchered, because they probably were doing butchery, while without any regard for like thematics or the spirit of the story. So yeah,
Wow, okay. You know who edited this film? The name is Luke Charocchi.
Cherokee.
Charocchi, probably. Who also edited Split and Glass.
There you go. He's a Shyamalan native.
And The Visit, damn. Oh well.
Like I feel like there's this has like I don't know if this is like James Wan or whoever's like running the show in there, because
I
I
don't
think
think James Wan did anything.
I think I don't know what James Wan's role was in this, but there's some kind of an executive producer, some kind of like a Warner bean counting ghoul, just hanging over top of it like a vampire. Just cut it to the bone. You know, money. We've lost $50 million on this. I don't even know what the budget on this was.
I don't know, but then they also made it straight to Max, so there was no opportunity for it to make actual money at the box office, at least in the States.
Yeah, like I feel there's a story in there, as in like this is kind of a some kind of a tragic defeat somewhere in there. People were promised certain things, and people did misunderstood each other, and all of a sudden, like there's someone says like, we're $50 million in the can. What are you gonna do about it, James? And James Wan goes like, I'm gonna pay you back from my own savings account if I have to, but I'm releasing 3.5 hours all of it. And I'm like, no one's gonna sit through the 3.5 hours of it. Like, unless it has Marvel's Avengers in front of it, it's not gonna happen, James. And Gary Dauberman's like, but I really tried. Shut up, Gary. You know?
No one cares. Which is I think it's a testament also to the book itself, where it's impossible to make it a standard like 2 hour or less film. Like it just doesn't work narratively. The other two, they have ups and downs, of course. The 2004 one more high ups than the 79 one, but you need the 3 hours. Like there's
Yeah.
no way of telling what King was trying to achieve.
Yeah, exactly.
I counted because the moment the credits started rolling, I looked at the time, 1 hour and 44 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
1 hour and 44 minutes to tell the entire. The other two movies have 1 hour and 15 more.
Yeah,
Film.
and at the same time, by 1 hour and 44 minutes in the first one, at least I already know for a fact I'm sick and tired of David Soul.
Yes.
But yeah,
1 minute and 44 into that one.
I agree that there's something in there, and at the same time, I'm with you on this. There's no way you can boil this down to a feature film format. It would have to be a film that you ask the viewer to like lend you their vote and say like, agree to stay in the cinema for nearly 4 hours for this.
Oh God, no one would do it.
But at the same time, it's paced in such a way that it's not, because it's like the book is paced for a 2-week session with it. Like you're supposed to take your time with this book, right? So it doesn't have the snappy pacing. It kind of unfolds like, you know, like Dracula is a long book. I mean, it's like 400 pages, so it's not exactly long, but it's long enough. But it's like written in letters and diary entries, and you kind of have to just get on board the fact that, you know, like Mina just like finishes having like a dramatic episode with some kind of a demon and just decides to just quickly take some notes.
Of
you know,
course. Of course.
because you gotta.
times.
Or like Van Helsing just had a close encounter with Renfield, and he goes into his gramophone to record a memo. So
Gotta
you know,
keep a record.
you gotta because it's all about science meeting the occult. But anyway,
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
why, in my opinion, the most interesting unofficial adaptation of Salem's Lot is the Mike Flanagan show, Midnight Mass, which I know you've not been able to watch. I don't know if you even started it maybe at the time.
I started last night, and I was so tired that I just like smashed my face against my tablet, and I was just like, I think I'm not in the position to watch anything. So I'm hoping I'll start tonight.
I think that's a seven episode show that essentially does what the Salem Slot adaptations will try to do and failed in one way or another, which is just take the time to know the characters, take the time to build up the horror, and then just take it from there. I think it's an interesting journey that you are going to go into, and I think you will definitely see similarities. But Mike Flanagan gets King, so even just something that's wholly original to him still has that DNA
Yeah.
to
Yes. Absolutely. And at the same time, I'll probably say, like, King is a writer. I mean, like, some of his work you can translate into a feature film format, and it will work. And some of them just do not try.
sell.
Unless you can just pull a Kubrick and say, take just an aspect of something like The Shining and say, like, why don't I just leave everything but the cabin fever and just make a movie out of that? And knowing for a fact that King's gonna hate it because it will look like you've just missed the point of the book, right? But I think he knows that, like, either this or it's gonna be a 6.5 hours, and you watch the 6.5 hours Mick Garrick film, and it's kind of like Mick Garrick's film, and it's not very good.
You feel the hours. You feel.
You feel time just running out, or like you feel like this is, like you could as well just like smoke like three packets of cigarettes just to take it off your life expectancy, you know.
Speaking of life running out, we have there are these are not the only these are the only direct adaptations actually of Salem's Lot, but there are other media related to it. We're not going to spend 30 minutes talking about them, but I was just curious, very briefly, how do you feel about A Return to Salem's Lot, which is its own, like, honestly, I would say an unofficial sequel to
It's Larry Cohen.
Larry Cohen, which I do like. I do like Larry Cohen. I think he's an acquired taste. The type of very, very, very cheap B, even C movies from the 70s and 80s that he made, all starring the same guy, which I like, Michael Moriarty. He has big Bill Burr vibes. But, you know,
Sure.
I like A Return to Salem's Lot. I don't know. I think you're much more negative than I am.
Oh, I hated it.
Fair.
I don't know. I mean, one thing I like about it is because, like, it underscores the importance of the original Salem's Lot, as in like Stephen King's Salem's Lot, and the fact that sort of maybe Tobe Hooper's miniseries kind of give permission to, which is the 1980s vampire revival. Because you have your Fright Nights, you have Once Bitten, you have Monster Squad, you have Lost Boys, you have all that shit. You have you have the Catherine Bigelow Near Dark. Like, there's
True.
all sorts of films happening between like 1984 and 1988, somewhere in there. And A Return to Salem's Lot is kind of like, what if we just revisited the Granddaddy, and you watch this and like, what if we didn't? But I appreciate the practical effects and stuff. Like, there's some kind of like a crude Italian horror sort of quality to it.
It's like all those cheap, like, fake sequels they would make. It's like it has nothing to do with the actual Salem's Lot, but it just has the name. It has vampires, so why not?
It's kind of like you have Pacific Rim and Atlantic Rim for like £1 in a bin. This would be like Shalom's Lot.
Shalom's Lot. I think, I do like the fact that they basically turned the town full of vampires. They're like running loose at this point, and they turn them into literal capitalist monsters.
Yep.
With Nazi tendencies to it.
It's kind of like nothing but trouble, just a tiny bit.
Yes, and director Samuel Fuller plays a Nazi killer. This old grandpa Nazi killer who really wants to destroy all of these vampires. I had a blast with it. I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did, but I also get why. I think just like watch it as a Larry Cohen film. It's super fun. Expect any relation whatsoever to what King was writing, or even the 1979 movie, to be honest, doesn't work.
I mean, it really should have been like completely disentangled from the Salem's Lot lore. It could be just like any knockoff of that. I would live with that, and then you can say like, okay,
just call it Vampires in Maine.
Like, doesn't even have to be in Maine. It doesn't have to be in
Arizona. I don't know.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, it kind of just has its own flavor. But by tethering it to that, it gives you a sense of expectation, and it's unwarranted because it comes It just has its own thing going on about it. Um, but yeah, but for me, like the biggest problem with that was that I didn't have any fun with it, like at all. It's just there's something about it that's just like tiring. And I know it's like
Yeah.
7 minutes long, something like
It's
that.
it's the shortest out of all of this.
Look, you could watch this movie twice, and like the Tobe Hooper's TV series is still going.
He's about to kill Susan Norton in that one.
Yeah.
Speaking of the opposite thing, actually, we have the last related piece of media, which is Chapel Wait, an adaptation, like a 10-part. At this point, miniseries was supposed to be season 1, but a
Call it a
miniseries.
miniseries is also polite because you know it was cancelled.
Yeah, yeah. Adaptation of Jerusalem's Lot, which is the first of 2 follow-up stories. In this case, actually a prequel to Salem's Lot, set in the 19th century. Stars 2-time Oscar winner Adrian Brody, Emily Hampshire, and a bunch of other people. Personally, I'll be just very brief about it. Just way too long. It's
Yep.
way too long. There's no reason for this to be 10 hours. It could have been 5 hours. It would be perfectly fine. I think
Just
it looks
1 hour
good.
and a half would have been fine.
I mean, adapt the actual story, which in my opinion is a very. I've not read much short form Stephen King, but it does very much capture Lovecraft very well with this. You know, it's like written as in epistolary form, just like people sending each other letters. This Mr. Boone, just go found my chapel. Wait, I inherited it. What happened here? It is mysterious. It is also very disturbing at the end. I think the climax is great.
I mean, the short
Of-
story or
The short story. The short
yeah,
story.
with the worm.
Very unnerving. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
The worm and the church exploding, and then
Yep.
people go back and it's not there. It's like, what the fuck? Very Lovecraftian again. But they turned the show into this, like, I don't know. It's bloated. Just bloated. There's too many characters, too much going on. Not all of it is interesting. I like the cast. I think the cast is my favorite part, even though I'm not a fan of Emily Hampshire. But everything else, I don't know how you feel about this.
Like with King's short stories, I think they're like one thing I did write a little thing about this. I think there are like ways of treating them, because I think King I think I think first and foremost he's not as precious about them as he is about his novels. I think he just like whacks them out just because he has like 2,000 words to write tomorrow. So he goes like, I finished writing a novel, and just like I have to type something. so you will just like write one, right? So I'm not sure he's precious about them. So like there may not be too much thought going into this, and at the same time there may be a little bit more raw. So some of
More
his short
playful,
stories,
I would
yeah, more
say.
playful. A lot of times, sometimes like because again, like this is something that many people don't necessarily get, is like King has a sense of humor. Then and he's, let's just say, but like he's like a goofy boomer dad, you know. So he's kind of like that, but like I also think that there is like no good reason to turn what essentially is like, I want to say like what, 30 pages, maybe
A
less,
bit longer than that,
maybe a
but
little bit more,
it's
into
like
10.
almost a novella, we could say.
Yeah, but turning into a 10 hours of television with an expectation of another season,
Oh my god.
right, is much. However, at the same time, it's not necessarily unwarranted, because what this, like, if you take the story at face value, say like, well, maybe there's like an hour and a half you could squeeze in there, right? However, you could take the story and say, think about the world building it promises, and just imagine things around it. And this is kind of where you start with King, but you just go your own way. And I think this is kind of where the story goes, right? So I appreciate the fact that it kind of does it, that there's this like, well, there's this vampire king, and there's this sort of like, you know, this colony of all these vampires, whatever, and there's this racism in this town, which I think this is kind of like the homage to King vibe, because this town is cruel to its people, and there's this
The
guy
most
who,
interesting element, I would say, as well,
Yeah.
narratively.
but oh Jesus, it takes so much time for things to get going. Like one of those things, like, well, it's just 10 hours of this is way too long. And actually, at this point, like even imagining it, someone says, like, what if we do another season of this? Like, what are you going to do in that season? If this was successful, probably would be now on season 7. And now, like, Adrian Brody would be, like, leveled up like some kind of a superhero going straight to hell to fight another king of vampires or whatever, you know?
It's so weird because it has an ending as well. Like it doesn't have a cliffhanger. That's the most surprising thing to me, knowing it was supposed to have a season 2.
Yeah, it
It's like,
has this sort of
just ends.
apocalyptic ending.
Yeah, just like story's over.
Yeah, so I don't know what they wanted to do, but I feel like there's a story to tell around Jerusalem's lot, and I think that would be an interesting sort of concept of taking like a Lovecraftian, because like adding the Lovecraftian layer on underneath Salem's Lot is interesting because it maybe contextualizes some of that evil and maybe even just adds a layer to the conversation about maybe this is something. Look,
It's
maybe
always
this is
been there.
it's always been there. Maybe this is some kind of guilt baked into the American experience because you can always you can see yourself as we're land of the free and home of the brave, and also we're like they're colonizing a land that has like people who just like have happily lived there, you know. So maybe that's kind of an expression of that, or you could interpret it as such. Or you can like there are elements of like how mental illness is treated as some kind of occult. So it also just harks back to Dracula, where mental illness and science and scientific understanding of the human mind is kind of put to discussion. So yeah, there's an attempt at something, but at the same time they don't know what to lean into, and they just run with like I don't know, with tangential character stuff for I want to say 6 out of the 10 hours. It's a lot of time.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Maybe even 7 hours.
Yes, maybe
There's like
even
2 really good episodes, and the rest are
like this home
Disposable.
invasion is what you live for. The home
Yes.
invasion episode is kind of where things really get cooking. But Jesus
which
Christ.
is halfway through the show, which means then you have 4 episodes before the climax.
Yes, and they come back to this village, and I was just like, oh god, it takes so long.
It's so long. Oh well, yeah. I would not recommend it personally unless you are a diehard fan of the source material.
Yeah,
Otherwise, there's no real reason
Yeah.
to watch it. Or you love Adrian Brody, which fair, valid.
it's the sort of like this. It's not even you can't even recommend it to like Stephen King completists. It's for those of us who are kind of on some kind of like a journey of self-discovery where you actually want to like understand quite a bit around what's going on in this guy's head, maybe, or how you can like because I see like well, King is to me like one of the greatest American writers currently living. And I say this also fully knowing that he's constantly dismissed as a kind of like an airport page turner hack, right? But also he gets the sort of the Americana that I think he comments on the American experience in ways that other people have to get to do in literary fashion, where they just they write books that just like they sit down to write a book. Well, maybe I'll get the literary Nobel Prize this year if I write that kind of book. You know, they just like sit down with like a pretension to greatness, and this guy just writes a cool story, and at the same time he just slips you this commentary underneath it that like John Coetzee and Han Kang just sit down and just pompously engineer, you know. That's kind of how I see this. Like this guy has a knack for just slipping you these conversations like while he's telling you cool stories, you know, about like I don't know, parental neglect, about sort of like your like I don't know, childhood trauma. Like It is a great story about childhood trauma that's just disguised in this sort of weird scary clown shit. And here you kind of have like Jerusalem's Lot is kind of like a nice addendum to a very potent conversation about the small towns disappearing off the map, evil from outside versus evil from within. And this kind of adds a layer of context that you can then, like if you're a filmmaker, you can run with. And I suppose Chapelwaite runs in a direction where you just like halfway through you go like, you're running the wrong direction. Just want to shout after Brody. It's like, come back, you're wrong way.
The
You're wrong
story's
way,
somewhere
lads."
else, man.
Yeah, the story's elsewhere. Jesus, can you please? Yeah. So apologies to anyone who like thinks this is a recommendation for Chapelwaite. It isn't, but yeah.
Imagine there's like a diehard fan who was very sad they canceled it. It's like, oh,
There's always one. He goes like, you know what's a cool show you should see? Chapelwaite. It's just only one season. They cancelled it after one season. You watch it like, good.
that Adrian Brody just likes recommending it to people.
It's just Adrian Brody recommending it
On
to
stage of the Oscars. It's like, let's just do season 2 now that they won again.
Do you think
bless
he
him.
gets $1 every time someone on MGM Plus just clicks on it?
I hope so. He deserves it. Can buy himself a nice coffee. I don't know. Coffee's so expensive nowadays. It's no
A lollipop.
$1 anymore. A lollipop.
$1.
To the one person watching Chapelwaite, thank you. Just like sucks on it. But yes, thank you, Jakub, for this conversation. We're at the end, which is my favorite part, where we talk about our favorites. I think the answer is very clear, but just to confirm, which is your favorite adaptation then of Salem's Lot? I think the book stands tall in its own league, but in terms of these 3 main adaptation, 1979, 2004, 2024.
Oh, the 2004, like hands down, like 3.5 out of 5, but still, like this is like head and shoulders above all of them. I think that
And
it's the
shoulders
most
above the 2 and 1 star.
Oh yeah. No, like Tobe Hooper is like 2.5, I suppose, maybe 2. But yeah, it gets the closest to what I think King intended, and I think it also gets opens up an interesting avenue for a conversation at the time that uses the spirit of the book, not necessarily the plot of the book.
Yeah, I was not expecting I would say that, but I completely agree actually. I was surprised by the quality of it, not even just for adaptation's sake, which I agree what you were saying. Just it's the most faithful, shockingly as well. It gets
Yep.
most of the beats right, and what happens to the characters, despite its modern setting and weird framing device. But it's also just the most fun, which sounds like maybe a very shallow thing to say, but it is true. At the end of the day, Stephen King's writing is entertaining. You said it as well. Like, you want to keep turning those pages. You are intrigued in what's happening in this town and what's going to happen to these characters. So you actually want to feel the same thing watching the 3-hour TV movie, which doesn't really happen with 2 other adaptations.
Yeah,
Which is a shame.
also,
but-
for something that's made for TNT, Rob Law, Samantha Mathis, Rutger Hauer, Donald Sutherland, James Cromwell, Andre Brower, like this, the cast on this thing is just immaculate.
Yeah, I want to say, like, I didn't mention him, but maybe my favorite performance in the 2024 version is Spencer Treat Clark, who plays Mike Ryerson.
Oh, interesting.
Well, it was like, every time I see him nowadays, I'm like, is that the guy? Is that the little kid from Gladiator? from Unbreakable? It's always him. But I think he's just a very talented actor. And he does the most with that role. He has a very unsettling energy to him, but also he brings tragedy to the character of Mike Ryerson, which I didn't really feel in the other 2 adaptations. But yeah. What about your favorite quote? Is there a favorite quote or a favorite passage from the book that you have saved up?
When you've asked me, I had to go and actually leaf through the book to find it. But there are
You
2
read it again
lines.
just to find one.
I think it's in one of the sort of the Lot chapters. Oh Christ, I wrote this down. There was this: the town knew about darkness and it knew about evil and it knew about terror. And there's another one called "Evil doesn't disappear, it waits." It just encapsulates exactly what this sort of like. Oh, while we're talking about vampires, like the book itself tells you what the problem is. It's like it's just about this sort of weird and imperceptible, everlasting, never ceaseless evil that just lurks. it's just, it captures the tone perfectly of this book. There's just like, well, we're just like caring about these characters, we're having fun hunting vampires, and also there's this dread baked into these quotes. But yeah, like in terms of scenes, I really always liked this of the horror. Well, there's the horror and dread in Burke suspecting that, I think, is it Ryerson? Yeah,
Ryerson.
Upstairs something's happening to them, and that he just something's going on in there. That's a great scene. And I also love how Callahan succumbs to Barlow. I think this is like I think maybe this is the first time we kind of just interact with Barlow like face to face, and when he succumbs to his,
As a confrontation, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Because we do see him like talk and seduce a couple people before.
yes, but this is just where you see, like, he like tears Petrie's parents in half. It's just such a violent scene, and then Callahan just becomes a sort of victim. He just
Test of faith failed. Can't go back to the church anymore. He has to wander away. And then he comes back into the fourth, I don't know, one of the Dark Tower books, right?
I think he comes back in like, what is it, like Wolves of Kala or something?
Right, which is an interesting connection. I do like that King really does love Salem's Lot. He keeps coming back to it in one way or another.
Yes, and also I suppose he just sees his books as kind of like a King verse as well. Like, he just has fun with his characters,
Connections and everything.
and the characters he writes. As in, a lot of people ask him about these characters, like, what happened to Franny from The Stand? What happened to this? What happened to that? Was Ben still alive? Because people actually do care about these folks because they're so lifelike.
Yeah, I get attached to them. My favorite quote, it's this passage where they're just talking about the town towards the end. It's a bit longer, but basically it says, whole country's going the same way. Me and Nolly went to a drive-in show up in Falmouth a couple of weeks ago, just before they closed her down for the season. I seen more blood and killings in that first Western than I seen both years in Korea. Kids was eating popcorn and cheering him on. He gestured vaguely at the town, now lying unnaturally gilded in the broken rays of the westerning sun like a dream village. They probably like being vampires. Which just goes back to that idea, which I really like, of just they don't become these senseless monsters, which is what happens in like the 2024 film, even all of the free adaptations in one way or another. But I do like how King just essentially turns the metaphorical rotten nature of these people, the evil that you were talking about, it just makes it literal when they become vampires.
Yeah, almost like he gives them, like, they gave themselves permission to do what they want to do.
Yeah, ironically, A Return to Salem's Lot is a better portrayal of the vampires of Stephen King, of just like being conscious people still leading some sort of life, than either of the adaptations, than any of the adaptations, direct ones. But yeah, no, but there's so many other quotes as well. I saved up a bunch in between. What about if you had to pick one scene to close things off from any one of the adaptations? What's your favorite one?
Oh, any of the adaptations.
Yeah.
There's one that I think, look, okay, two things I'll bring. Look, how do I put it delicately? Like, from any of the adaptation, I'll probably say I like from the 79, I have to say something because it actually gave permission to a lot of things in the 80s. That's sort of, the hammer feel of the invasion of the house, even though they kind of just depart the sort of like the boarding house, it's just like it just reminds you that Tobe Hooper knows that King is a guy who grew up watching movies, great stuff. And then one little thing that people tend, like, no one really knows about it until they see it, is the face Donald Sutherland makes. And if there's a moment in the show where he does the to someone, and I'm like, I don't know why, but this is, if you ask me about like, hey, Salem's Lot for 2004, that's the first thing I think about.
He looks so comfy in the movie as well.
That was
It looked like
so
it was a
cool.
fun shoot for him. No.
Has these eyes, his eyes come out of his out of his eye sockets almost. Like I felt kind of concerned about him.
It's like cartoon mode.
Yeah.
Yeah, my scene actually is also from the 2004 one. I mentioned it briefly before, but just the confrontation between Matt Burke and Mike Ryerson,
Mm-hmm.
where they like the vampire Ryerson implies that Matt Burke is attracted to him. It plays with his closeted sexuality. He's like, that touch my scars and all of that. And Andrew Brower is just like collapsing emotionally out of fear and repressed emotion. Like there's so much going on with him.
Mm-hmm.
It is a case of just a really great actor elevating what's written on the page into something new and special.
Yeah.
Where I was watching it, I think that's the moment where I was like, I'm low key loving
Mm-hmm.
this version. I'm like, this is definitely something I haven't seen before. It wasn't present in the book, and it's
Yep.
they're just bringing something new to it, which is I think always the beauty of the adaptations. It's not just being one to one, just like this is what has to be done to work. It's like no, you find your own things that work and you see and try to capture the spirit, and I think they do it beautifully in that scene. I love that part. It's very poignant. And on that note, this is the end of our epic Salem slot conversation. Thank you, Jakub, for joining me on this
Pleasure.
journey of just vampire lore. I don't think I want to hear about the Marston House, Arlo, Ben Mears for a good 10, 20 years. Until I will probably come back to it. Maybe during another Stephen King read through once again. Who knows? Who knows what will happen in the future with us? But I do know that at least there will be the Uncut Gems podcast. What's happening on your show, Jakub? Where can the listeners find you and keep hearing you? And the good Randy's voice, who's also been a guest on this pod.
Yeah, Randy's been in here to talk about history of violence, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah, so you can find me and Randy. You can find us talk about films no one else wants to talk about for at least as long as it takes to watch them. Sometimes way longer. And that's at Uncut Gems Pod everywhere on social media, almost everywhere, because I think our Twitter account is more or less dormant because I don't like going there. I don't like going to Twitter. It's just a sad place.
Just cancel it.
I think I will. But yeah, uncutgemspodcast.com is the website where everything kind of is collated together. And also we do have a Patreon account, which is patreon.com/uncutgemspod, where just $3 of support gives you access to like tons and tons of like extra shows. So we have like hundreds of podcasts at this point because this thing has been running for now like 4 and a bit years.
4 years almost.
So there's a lot of material in there. So if you like, I don't know, weird movies, or not, some of them are not necessarily weird, but just like slightly off the beaten track, or films that like only a mother could love, then kind of that's kind of where we are. So that's kind of what I do as a speaker to a microphone, and also I do write some things about films or culture, and I don't write for any outlets because I feel this is just inappropriate at this point to just go and ask and beg for someone to publish me. So I just have my own little website called flashonfilm.com, FLASZ onfilm.com, where I just, when I feel about writing an essay about something, I'll just write an essay. Or if I feel like about, I don't know, writing a review, I will do so. Now, I don't know when this is going to come out. Maybe when this is out, you'll be able to find because I'm still conceptualizing a little piece about what if Nurse Ratched wasn't necessarily evil.
It will probably have come out. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some stuff like that you can find there, and I do have like all my Stephen King writing is in there as well. So yeah, that's where I am.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely go check everything out. The links to all of those things are in the show notes below. Meanwhile, you can follow this podcast at Anatomy of Adaptation Pod. You can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky at NikkiGra97, and also on Letterboxd, Nicola Grasso, if you want to stay up to date with what I'm watching. I am on Goodreads. I hate Goodreads. I'm also on Storygraph. I
What,
love
is there
reading
another
about
one?
Storygraph. Oh yeah, there's many others. But if you want to keep up with my reading as well, at this Goodreads is the most streamlined and popular one. So go check me out there. Thank you for listening to this episode. Stay tuned because in 2 weeks I will be joined once again by my good friend Raphael Felix to talk about Jean-Paul Sartre's The Wall collection of short stories, which includes Childhood of a Leader, which was adapted by Brady Corbett as his directorial debut. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have a fabulous day. Goodbye.